With oil prices at a 4-year low, tensions are rising between the producing countries. And even as consumers enjoy the respite and the global economy gets a boost, analysts warn the broader implications of cheap oil could be more troublesome than beneficial. Ahead of its meeting in Vienna next week, we ask, is OPEC playing politics with the global market? Hello, I'm Taimur Nabili. Welcome to Between the Lines. Now, the oil ministers from the OPEC countries will meet next week to try to decide what to do about falling oil prices. Crude has slumped about 30% from this year's high, reached back in June, and the International Energy Agency is forecasting there could be further declines through next year. The OPEC cartel pumps about 40% of the world's oil right now, and members like Venezuela and Ecuador are asking for production cuts to make up for the falling prices. But the largest member, Saudi Arabia, has been resisting those calls, prompting speculation that it's actually willing to let the prices slide to protect its own market share. But are there broader strategic motives too? Lower prices hurt the economies of arch rivals like Russia and Iran, and they undermine the US shale oil boom. The slide has been good for some, consumers in particular, and the IMF is also forecasting a net gain for global economic growth next year, driven by cheaper energy. But what could be the longer-term implications of these fluctuations? Joining me on tonight's program to discuss these issues are Dr. John Holzmann, President and co-founder of the political risk consultancy John C. Holzmann Enterprises, and from the home of OPEC in Austria, we're joined by Johannes Benigni, founder of the industry research group JBC Energy. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Johannes, if I may begin with you, just outline for us how you think the conversation might go in Vienna next week when OPEC gets together.
Well, it's going to be the most exciting OPEC meeting for years now. OPEC will have to talk to us, and they will give us a clear direction. Either they want to have market stability, what they have been talking so far, and that means they would need to remove barrels from the market, or clearly they are content with oil prices around $80 or even lower, which then implies that there may be a different agenda at work.
Saudi Arabia has been reasonably quiet about this issue thus far. There have been a few comments in recent days, but very bland, very benign. Do you think that it's their intention to make this a political issue, or do you think that they're just reasonably content right now to see how the market shapes out and it won't be much of a problem?
I mean, Saudi Arabia has been quite consistent in what they say. They said they want to have a stable market. And also in the last couple of weeks, they confirmed that position. And I think the proof is going to be next week in the meeting, whether they are ready to remove some of the barrels. So far what they have said is no difference. There's no departure on Saudi's policies that we have seen so far. But of course, is it enough for them, to make a cut, to support a cut? We know some of the member countries are more inclined to cut. Others may feel that's not what they want to do. So yeah, there is going to be a big debate within the organization.
John, it's one thing for Saudi Arabia to say they want a stable market, but they're going to need to act, and thus far they don't really seem to be showing much inclination to do so, do they?
No, it's masterly inactivity. They say with a straight face that economic fundamentals are all that drives them, but of course this has never been true with oil or any other commodity. Politics enter into this. And I just say the two theories as to why the Saudis have been happy to let oil go to a 4-year low. One theory is market share, as you outlined, which is I call the John D. Rockefeller theory. Our old oil tycoon in America let oil go at a loss, pumped oil at a loss to knock out his competitors. In this case, the U.S. shale revolution. All of a sudden there's this new competitor on the horizon, but the only way they make money is if the price is higher. Well, the Saudis with $700 billion in reserves can lose money for a while if it keeps shale at bay. And then the second theory you've outlined is more the Oliver Stone theory, if the first one is John D. Rockefeller, which is this is a great way to get back at their enemies. I mean, Iran needs oil to be about $140 a barrel or so to break even. The Russians north of 100. And you can really strike out at your enemies as the Saudis did in the 1980s and really nobbling the Soviet Union. We will see at the meeting, if there's no cut or a very small cut, I think that we can say the Saudis are playing politics.
Why would the Saudis play politics in this manner? I mean, yes, the effects of hampering Iran a bit more would certainly suit their political purposes to a certain extent, and perhaps taking on Russia too, although perhaps not quite so obviously. Are you suggesting that this is something they're doing on their own, or is there a suggestion that this might be done in concert with the U.S., as was done, as you pointed out, in the 80s?
I mean, certainly the speculation is it would be in concert with America. Secretary of State Kerry went to see King Abdullah September 11th of this year to talk about Syria. And let's remember that that's where the Russians come into the equation for the Saudis. They are the #1 sponsor of Assad in Syria, who is the archenemy of the Saudis. Assad and the Russians have leaned in the direction of Iran and Hezbollah and Assad, the Shia, within the Middle East, and the Saudis are, of course, a champion of the Sunnis in the Middle East. So to remind the Russians who's boss, playing the oil card makes sense. As you say with Iran, it's just more straightforward. The Iranians hurt at a much higher percentage of dollar per barrel than the Saudis do. And so to remind them, they're perpetually in competition geostrategically for dominance in the Gulf because they happen to live there. And so to remind them that this is the last best play the Saudis can make makes eminent sense. We certainly will see, not on what they say, I could care less what they say, it's what they do. And we're going to find out at the meeting, but if there's no cut or a small cut, it's either John D. Rockefeller or Oliver Stone.
Johannes, do you see such nefarious calculations happening behind the scenes?
Well, I don't believe that there is an agenda from OPEC to squeeze out the shale oil producers. I don't think that is on their agenda. First of all, I think the market decline happened. It was not a planned market decline. It was not something that was intended. There were a series of issues that really pushed the market over the cliff, and a lot of financial plays were followed through. I think the Saudis are very close to the U.S. administration, and if there is an agenda to push out shale oil, the question is this something that happens with the blessing of the U.S. administration, which I don't really believe so. I think what could very well be the case, and we will find out, like John said, if there is no cut, then clearly OPEC is departing from their policy of stable prices, and then I would be inclined to say probably there are political considerations that aim for having certain impact on those that require higher oil prices, and I would probably put Russia in the first row, but also Iran, of course.
The implications of shale oil, though, for Saudi are pretty significant, aren't they? I mean, at this point, maybe it's overreaching a little to say that they want to destroy the U.S. industry, but given the way that industry has progressed, not only in the U.S., but into Europe and China and other parts of the world too, Saudi Arabia and the whole Middle East oil production process is going to be severely challenged by this if it continues at this pace, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this is exactly the question, whether that is to continue in this pace. We feel, yes, there is a welcomed addition from barrels in the U.S. We don't believe that the sustainability of the supply growth is as strong as a lot of shale oil protagonists believe. Yeah? So we think there may again be a slowdown in this respect. And having said that, you will need more barrels from the Middle East in particular in the next 10 years. So from that point of view, you look at it from the Saudis, they can deal with $80. For them, it's not a problem. But what does it help you if you push shale oil to $80 or lower? Yes, you may kill the one or the other producer in America, but those wells you can easily switch on and switch off. So when the price moves up again to $100, those wells that are profitable at 100 will again be switched on. So I don't believe that the strategy would necessarily have a medium-term impact, on killing those producers. Either it works or it doesn't work. And so it always will be certain oil that is going to be economically viable at $200 or at $50 or anywhere in between. And so I think that's not the strategy I can see from the Saudis.
John, there is a bit of a conflict between your Rockefeller theory and your Oliver Stone theory, isn't there? I mean, if they are colluding with the United States, then clearly trying to crush the U.S. shale oil industry is not going to be something D.C. signs on to.
Well, no, I don't think there is. I mean, the key point is, let's start with the basic fact. The Saudis are what we're talking about. We're not talking about OPEC. We're talking about the swing producer in OPEC. that will be the key to determining this. Iran is part of OPEC, and they want a very different thing. They want barrels off immediately for a variety of obvious reasons. So it's really what the Saudis think, and it's about America in both cases. If it's the John D. Rockefeller theory, it's not to destroy shale, as was rightly said. It's to preserve market share. And of course, I don't think that they plan to bring the price down. Those Saudis are not responsible for the slowdown in Europe and the slowdown in Asia, particularly in China. But when they see something opportunistically in front of them to preserve market share, as Rockefeller did, without alienating the American government is not angry at the Saudis for what they've done up to now. Confused, waiting to see what happens, as we all are, perhaps, but not angry. They want to preserve market share without alienating the United States because they need to work with the United States, frustrating as that is for them all the time. The second theory, of course, makes more sense, that the Saudis and the Americans are together and say we will keep pumping because it puts immense pressure on Iran, which suits the Saudis to the ground and suits the Americans hoping for a nuclear deal with Iran this weekend, and Russia. First and foremost, and I agree here, the Russians leaning very heavily on the side of Assad, seen as an arch enemy by the Saudis. And of course, from America, that works too. So I don't think it's really contradictory. It does come down to what the Saudis think about the United States.
Very briefly from both of you, are you expecting a cut in Vienna next week? John first.
If there's one, it won't amount to anything, so no, I'm not.
And Johannes?
I expect 1 million barrel cut.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. We'll say goodbye to Johannes Bernini for now. John will stay with us for part 2 of the program. When we come back, we'll discuss what any long-term decline in oil prices could mean for the global economy and even for the environment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, whether or not OPEC cuts its production next week, many analysts say the global oil glut looks likely to deepen. And if prices do head lower, perhaps even down as low as $60 a barrel, an oil-inspired economic crisis could be upon us. Not to mention the disincentive that would be for renewable energy markets. We'll pick up the conversation in this second half of the show, and we're joined by Nicholas Greeley, who's director of the No Hot Air Energy Consultancy. Still with us, John Holzman, president and co-founder of John C. Holzman Enterprises. Nicholas, since you're new to the show, we were saying in the first half that the threat to the fracking industry in the United States from lower oil prices is something that some people speculate may be part of the Saudi agenda. Do you see this kind of conspiracy underway?
I don't think so at all. I think it has developed so quickly that it really hasn't had any time to invent any conspiracy theories. I think one of the things that people ignore about the United States as well, and this is certainly very bearish for oil prices going forward, is that probably about a third of the U.S. reduction is actually from energy efficiency, or specifically from vehicle mileage standards.
Mm. John, let's move on to some of the subjects we talked about, the political risks from these falling oil prices. Now, you're saying this is designed to put pressure on Russia and Iran. What would be the fallout for greater political turmoil in Russia and Iran? If their economies start to fail, this is it's not necessarily going to be a win-win situation for Saudi Arabia and America, is it?
No, and again, it's often Goldilocks. I mean, I don't think it's always failing. It's getting it right. They certainly want to put pressure on both the economies and the politics in those countries. For instance, in Russia, if things got worse in Russia, and already the Russian central bank has just forecast absolutely no growth next year. They need to be above $100 a barrel to break even on their budget, and they're in real trouble. Putin's rating is though 80%. It will take a while for that effect to take place, but as pressure heightens, one of the things the Russians might cut is direct aid to Assad in Syria, which would suit the Saudis to the ground. It's not about destroying Russia. It's about changing some of their extraneous behavior. You'd rather cut helping Assad than you'd help your pensioners, and that the Saudis are counting on. For Iran, it's more straightforward, just geostrategic opportunism. I don't think it's a conspiracy, but I do think that it has happened quickly, and opportunism is part of what the Saudis have done with oil for, say, the last 60 years. More power to them. They're playing the card that God gave them.
But I'm just thinking about the broader political impacts and economic impacts of all of this. I mean, a destabilized and perhaps even collapsing Russia is not going to be good for the global economy. And Nicholas, nor is a US fracking industry under pressure, is it? I mean, it may not be a conspiracy, it may be a mere byproduct, but let me just quote to you a survey by Deutsche Bank that came out recently, which says the recent stress tests of subprime borrowers suggest that if the price of US crude falls down towards $60 a barrel, it could lead to major defaults among some of these fracking producers in the United States because they're so heavily leveraged in getting their businesses up and running that their debts is going to become untenable.
Well, I think that we're quite a ways from $60 yet, and I don't really see it in anybody's interest, anybody, OPEC, frackers, Russia, anybody, to let things go down that far. But on the other hand, US oil was always considered by the conventional wisdom to be very expensive and untenable. And there's been these theories around, surrounded by basically the old peak oil theories that have just haven't come to pass. Obviously, the costs of US shale are only going to go down. They're not going to go up. So if the price is 60, then we're going to be seeing more people actually making money at 50.
But that's a long-term developmental process. It's not something that is just going to kick in immediately. If they could make profits at 50, then they would be doing so now. Let me quote you another survey. JP Morgan says of the 12 largest shale oil basins in the US, 80% of them are barely profitable with prices at $80 a barrel. And that doesn't take into account interest payments and debt held by these shale producers. The point here being that this is a new industry with a fairly fragile debt structure, and any crack in those structures is likely to have fairly far-reaching effects.
Well, it's kind of choose your expert. We also have Ed Morrison from Citi and IHS just yesterday, who said that everything would be fine going down to at least 60, if not below. And certainly Ed Morse, I saw Ed Morse about a year ago, and I would imagine that things have developed since, but he said that there was plenty of, if not the majority of US shale was profitable at 40.
John?
Yeah, I think the key point here is it's not about getting rid of it. It's about if there is an opportunistic pressure, it's stopping new wells being drilled to maintain market share would be more the Rockefeller theory. It's not destroying it. And as you rightly say, it depends on your expert. But it does get more dicey the lower it goes, obviously. And it's to stop people drilling new wells to preserve market share from the Saudis makes more sense than destroying American shale, which they're not going to do. And nobody's going to let the price go too low because, again, like Goldilocks, you don't want the porridge too cold just because it's been too hot. If prices have been too high, you don't want them to be too low. That doesn't serve anybody's interest. So the key is putting pressure on people without anything tipping over. And that's very difficult to do, but the Saudis are past masters at it.
But it's important, Nicholas, to try and understand the state of this fracking industry because it's going to be a fairly key element of future energy policy, right? And if we don't know how stable this market is going to be, we can't really plan. Now, let me just pick up a couple of the points that you said. If it is profitable at 40, as you say, we surely would have seen fracking coming in many, many years ago and this becoming a much larger part of the oil industry well before now. One has to assume that the only reason that we suddenly got this industry developing so very fast is because prices were so high and made these practices more viable.
No, you have to think of fracking as a technology play. The technology is very depends on massive amounts of computational power, which were not previously available. We always knew in theory that the shales, the source rocks, contained a lot of natural gas and of oil, but nobody, until we had the combination of horizontal drilling, of hydraulic fracturing in its present form, and the computational power to analyze where the sweet spots are, that is why we're seeing this develop here in the second decade of the 21st century.
I don't know, John, if I were, if this is the case and we do have profitability because of this technology at $40 a barrel, then I'd be tending towards your Rockefeller theory, your Oliver Stone theory at this point, I think, because if they do start producing gas and shale at $40 and prices like that, then Saudi Arabia too is going to be in serious trouble, because that beats their own price points, doesn't it?
Well, no, it would, but on the other hand, the Saudis haven't really explored yet too much their own fracking possibilities, which may be immense. We don't know. What's right is that technology is what's changed the game. Theoretically, we always knew it was there, and the technology, by the way, is improving without getting in too much in the nuts and bolts for the viewers all the time. But that the Saudis who have, for the Saudis, it's a lot easier to extract oil at present. Fracking has made it easier and put America back in the game in a way nobody thought about 10 years ago, which is amazing. That the two might opportunistically use this moment to turn the screws on two of their enemies, as they certainly did in the Cold War when President Reagan convinced the Saudis to pump, which drove the Soviet Union under, would not be surprising. That the price can go down further is fine. That nobody wants it to go down too far and endanger what they've got is also true, but that's what negotiations are for.
Nicholas, quickly, let's talk about environmental issues here. If fracking is, as you say, developing so fast, and we have to presume that it will become more and more efficient, what that actually means in practical terms is we continue to rely on fossil fuel as our primary source of energy, which means we continue to pump gases into the air which damage the environment. Is this not a concern?
Well, that's certainly a concern, but the thing is, we are going to need fossil fuels. What we have to do is to move away to the most efficient fossil fuel, which is natural gas. We think, and certainly...
Sorry to interrupt, but shouldn't we be moving towards trying to make more efficient production of energy from non-fossil fuel sources?
Well, yes, but we're also talking, we're coming up against the laws of physics here. The renewable industry, in its present form, cannot do the majority of electricity generation, and it certainly can't do that in transport. And we certainly can't, we're not going to be seeing solar-powered cement or wind-powered steel and all these other very energy-intensive industries. Because let's remember that at least 1/3 of energy usage is in the chemical industry, in the fertilizer industry, the steel industry, the plastics industry, the cement industry, and so on and so forth. So we could replace, for example, electricity theoretically. It would be incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive, and one could possibly see that emerging. But it is a danger point, certainly for the renewable industry. But there are other things going on there, and especially, for example, in China. The example we see in China is that economics, which were helped, which would be on the side of coal, are finished when you have coal poisoning people.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Nicholas Greeley, John Holzman, thank you both indeed for being on the program tonight. And that's it for the show tonight and indeed for this week. On Monday on Between the Lines, the number of people killed in militant attacks worldwide jumped to a record last year. Is the planet becoming more radicalized, or are governments allowing terrorism to breed? That's our topic on Between the Lines, coming up on Monday. In the meantime, a reminder, our show is available online, channelnewsasia.com/video. Goodbye for now. Have a great weekend.